how good is this? I knew we were going to get some colour. I didn't quite expect it to be this epic. There's pinks and blues and it is amazing. This is looking really nice. Hello again. Out on location, finally. We're off the computer and we're out in the real world taking photos. So for those that tune into all of my editing videos, I will stick with the editing videos, so don't worry about that. But what I wanted to do is start showing more in-camera process, okay? So how we actually capture the image to start with before we even need to edit them, okay? So I will follow this video up with the editing, and that's where I'm going to stick with, because I know most of my subscribers are here for the editing side of things. But what I'm going to do is run through camera setup, because that is the really important part. It's really important to capture our photo first as best as we possibly can before we even think about editing it. Okay, so editing is very much a secondary process. The first process is capturing our image as nice as we possibly can and with the optimal settings. So that's what I'm going to run through. We're going to shoot in manual mode, and I'll show you exactly how easy it is to shoot in manual mode. With a scene like this where, you know, wildlife portrait's completely different. When you're doing seascapes, landscapes, shooting in manual mode is actually quite easy. Okay, so I'll run through how we do that. The sky's looking nice, so with a bit of luck we could get a pretty epic sky. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you do, please give it a thumbs up, it does help. And more importantly, it helps me understand what you guys want to watch. Okay, so while we're sitting here waiting for that sun to set, what I'm going to do is get the camera set up, and what I'll show you is how easy it is to shoot in manual mode. Seriously, you'll never go back to aperture priority, auto, get off those modes. Manual mode is just so easy to use that you'll think, why did I ever not use manual mode, when you see how easy it is. So I'll bring the camera over and I'll show you how we set it up. Okay, so the very first thing that I always do, any sort of seascape, landscape, I'm going into my ISO settings and I'm changing my ISO to 100. We don't want to be down at low. We don't want auto ISO. We want to be at ISO 100. Okay, so that's the first of my settings. Okay, so with a seascape, landscape, anywhere between F8 and F14 is kind of like the optimal settings. Okay, so in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to shoot at F13. That'll just give us a slightly bigger depth of field and a really good spot to start with. Okay, so if you're shooting landscapes, F13 is a really good spot to start. And then the final little trick is our shutter speed. So now for the rest of the night, I'm not going to change ISO. I'm not going to change my aperture. All I'm going to do is change my shutter speed to make everything either brighter or darker. And that is how easy it is to use manual mode. Okay, once you've got your ISO set, your aperture set, all you're changing is your shutter speed to make things brighter or darker. There's a few other things that I will cover as we shoot. Most importantly, histogram. Okay, histogram, very important for landscapes. Okay, so we'll cover that soon once we start to shoot. Okay, so now we're going to concentrate on our focus. Now I'm fairly far away from that tree, so I would say that tree's probably close to 10 meters away. So that's going to be my focal point. And by shooting at F14, if I focus on that tree, we're going to have all of our foreground in focus and we're going to have our sky in focus as well. Okay, so no need to focus stack. This is all in one shot. And F14 is going to give us a nice depth of field, and we're far enough away from the tree that we're still going to have our background in focus or our sky in focus as well. Okay, so now time to set up. Okay, we're starting to get that golden glow now. We've still got a fair bit before the water comes in, but I'm pretty confident just after sunset, once we get our colour, we should have enough water in there to get some nice reflections. But either way, it looks nice as it is. We've still got some nice little rock pools. So I'll frame something up and then I'll show you how we focus. Okay, so this is what we've got framed up, and as you can see, we're starting to get some colour in the sky. Still got a little way to go before the water comes in. Okay, now I like to manually focus. So what I do is I use my little zoom button, and that's going to be different with every camera. And what I'm going to do is make sure we're in manual focus. Okay, and once we're in manual focus, we're just going to hit our little zoom, and we're going to zoom in on that tree. So I'm going to zoom right in as far as I can, and then I'm just going to manually focus, get my focal length set, manually focus until that's super sharp, And then that's it for the rest of the night. Okay, I don't need to refocus. We're not going to worry too much about our foreground. That's our hyperfocal set for the rest of the night. So I don't need to worry about focus distance anymore, because we're going to be shooting at around about that same length all night. Okay, so our camera is set. We've got our ISO at 100. We've got our aperture at f13. And now all I'm going to do is change shutter speed to brighten or darken. It's as simple as that. To me, one of the most important things with any sunset, any landscape shoot is your histogram. Okay, now I know the more modern cameras have what they call the blinkies, which will give you your highlight warnings, but the histogram never lies. Okay, so what I mean by that, if we start to bring that histogram towards our right, that will brighten everything up. So as you can see our foreground nice and easy. And all I'm doing is changing shutter speed, as I mentioned earlier, and then we can make everything darker. Okay, so now look at the sky. All right, so even though our water hasn't quite reached yet, we're still probably another 20 minutes away from sunset, but we're starting to get some nice light on these clouds. Okay, so while we're waiting, I'm going to get some shots. The sky looks nice, not too worried about the water not being in my foreground. In fact, my tide prediction may have been a little bit off. So what I'm going to do, my ISO's set, my aperture's set, all I'm changing is shutter speed to make the image either brighter or darker, and watching my histogram. Okay, so what I'm going to do is make sure my highlights are under control. Okay, and that will give us a fairly dark foreground, but I'm not too concerned with my foreground at this stage. Okay, so this is going to be our first shot for the night. It's going to look very underexposed on the back of the camera, but by looking at my histogram, I can see that we've got shadow detail. Another thing I didn't mention was I shoot with a 2-second timer. So even though I'm on a tripod, shooting with a 2-second timer is just going to give us time to press the shutter, let go, let the camera settle, and then take a shot. Okay, so there's my first shot for the night. Okay, and that's it. That's the first shot for the night. So as you can see, composition is really nice. Okay, so I've been here a few times, and I sort of mention it a lot that keep revisiting locations, because some nights you get a really nice sky and it can just make or break an image. If you can get out here when the sky is really nice, it makes the image look so much better. Okay, find a composition that you know works and just revisit whenever you possibly can, hoping to get an epic sky. I'm going to do multiple exposures. So first thing I'm going to do is just speed up my shutter speed and get my sky so it's not clipping. So somewhere around about there. So there's our sky exposure. And then all I'm doing is slowing down my shutter speed, which will then give us some shadow detail. And we'll take that shot as well. And now we've got our multiple exposures. Okay, if you want to get it all in one shot, just try and get your histogram as close to the middle as possible. So don't be worried about blowing out your highlights just a little bit, because most cameras these days will recover some highlight detail. Okay, and that's it. That's how easy it is to do multiple exposures in manual mode. Okay, no need to set up bracketing. All I'm doing is changing my shutter speed to brighten or to darken. I'm not changing ISO, not changing aperture. I'm focused where I want to be. All I'm doing is changing my shutter speed to brighten and darken. That is how easy it is to use manual mode for a sunset. Okay, check it out. Right on sun is setting right now. Starting to get some really nice light, so I'm going to stop talking and take some photos. So I've showed you how I set up, and now all I'm going to do is change shutter speed. And that's it. For the rest of the night, I'm just simply changing my shutter speed and watching that histogram. So we've got everything fairly well exposed. Okay, so by looking at my histogram, that is all captured in one exposure. Might look a bit dark on the back of the camera, but as you'll see in the editing, that will be absolutely fine to edit. How good is this? I knew we were going to get some colour. I didn't quite expect it to be this epic. There's pinks and blues, and it is amazing. This is looking really nice. All right, well, give this guy a thumbs up, seriously. It's not often, well, it is in Harvey Bay, it is often that you'll see it. But have a look at that. How amazing is that sky? Now the tide's coming in, okay? And I'm framing it up, so I've basically got more sky than foreground, just because the sky is so nice. I've got enough foreground that it's still leads our eye out into the frame without having too much foreground. It's a little bit messy in front. I wish the tide would come in a little bit quicker, but that's the tide. Okay, if we had have been here last night, it would have been perfect. Wow, how epic was that? That was a really nice sunset. So now we'll go into the editing studio and I'll show you a single exposure versus a multiple exposure, okay? And I'll sort of explain the histogram a little bit more and how the histogram works and why the histogram is so important, okay? As long as if we understand our histogram, you're never going to blow your highlights and clip your shadows, okay? And that's what you'll see in the single exposure, which will still be fine, okay? We'll edit it so it still looks nice. Now onto the editing side of things, and what I'll do is I'll start just by quickly explaining the histogram and why it's so important, especially with landscape photography. Okay, so what we have here is a base exposure. Okay, so we've tried to keep everything within our histogram in the middle. So if we have a look at our histogram up here, everything to the right is our highlights, everything to the left is our shadows. So if we have a look at this image, for example, this one is slightly overexposed. So now our histogram is touching the right-hand side, which means we've overexposed or we've blown our highlights. If we have a look at this image, this one here is now touching the left-hand side, which means we've underexposed or we're clipping our shadows. Okay, and then this one here is kind of our in-between where we've lost a tiny bit of highlight detail and we've lost a tiny bit of shadow detail. But that's, you know, for 90% of people, that is perfectly fine, okay? Clipping your highlights by a little bit and your shadows by a little bit isn't a big deal. Okay, if you want to get really fussy, I've got plenty of other videos on exposure blending and explain why this is a good option. Okay, if you want to print your images nice and big, I do recommend multiple exposures, and all of that depends on your histogram. So if you get out there and you see that your shadows are getting very close to the left hand side and your highlights are getting very close to the right hand side, that's where you might want to consider doing multiple exposures. So understanding the histogram will tell you what you need to do. So I'll leave that for now. Today is simple and effective. Okay, we're working off one exposure. We've got our histogram all clumped fairly close to the middle. Okay, so what we're going to do, first thing I'm going to do is deal with my highlights. I'm just going to grab my highlight slider and bring that down. Okay, and this will work with pretty much any editing software. Same with Photoshop. If you just open in Photoshop, it will open in Adobe Camera Raw. I'm going to bring my whites down a little bit as well. So all I'm looking at this stage is this area. I want to try and get as much detail back in here as I possibly can. And we'll do some more adjustments soon. So I'm just sort of getting back as much as I can without it looking too unrealistic. So somewhere around about there. And then I can zoom back out. And now everything else is dark. So I've dealt with that area, but everything else has gone dark. So what we're going to do now is lift our shadows a little bit. And you know, this is personal. I don't like to take my shadows up too far. That's completely personal preference. Okay, so I usually go up to about 50 as a limit. Bring my blacks up a little bit as well. Now we're starting to get some detail back into our image. Okay, and finally, if we increase contrast, what that's going to do is start to push our histogram back towards the whites and the blacks. So you watch as I do this, it's starting to push that histogram back out. Okay. So I'm going to push that up to, again, I don't like to go too far. And now again, looking at my histogram, I'm not anywhere near the right-hand side. So that means we can brighten everything up a little bit. So I'm just going to brighten it up, just watching my histogram. And now we're getting closer to a nice exposure. Okay, we've dealt with those highlights. We've brought back some detail there. And if we have a look at our before, there's where we started. And that's where we're at. It's a very subtle adjustment, but it's bringing back some of that detail that, you know, we see with our eyes. Okay. Another thing that's really good to change, I normally change this first, is our profile. If we go to Adobe Landscape, it's going to boost our colors. Okay. And as you remember from the start of the video, it was a very bright, colorful sunset. So Adobe Landscape will help enhance that. And that's basically it. That's for starters, that's all you need to do. Okay, so you know, I say it a lot that a good photo is a good photo. You shouldn't have to edit it too much. Now, there's a lot more we can do. I'm not going to cover that in this video. I will do separate videos on other techniques, but that's a very basic how to understand your histogram, how to get as much detail out of your photo as you possibly can, and get your exposure right. Okay, so then you're not underexposing or overexposing, you're getting your exposure right. Okay, and then from there, that's when you can start to, learn about multiple exposures, exposing for your highlights, exposing for your shadows. Start here, start with one exposure, get that histogram as close to the middle as you possibly can, and you're going to be off to a really good start. Okay, so that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. If you did like it, please give it a like, give it a thumbs up. It does helps me sort of understand what people want to see. So thank you again, and hopefully I will see you all again very shortly. If you want lessons on how to get a sky like this, come and see me. Because when I order a sky, I usually order one like this. Okay, it happens all the time. Happens all the time when I go out. So yeah, it usually costs extra for a sky like this. So when the sky does this, it does cost extra. Not much, I'm cheap. I'm cheap.